Okay, looks like we got a good connection. Almost ready to start. Yeah, good. Somebody's told me the sound is good. The weather here is still taking a long time for spring to start. Still a lot of snow on the ground, and temperatures are just barely above zero. We'll wait till the top of the hour to start. Some people jump in at the last minute. Four right efforts are Wayama. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so today we're continuing through the series of the Bojjhangas, that is the factors of enlightenment, and we're dealing with the energizing factors. And last time we did Dhamma investigation of states, and today we're going to do VIriya, energy, which is obviously an energizing factor. The word VIriya is the same root that we get via Latin in words like virile, and hero is also from that same root, I think by a different same root, but I think it comes into English via a different transmission. So it means that the energy that sustains effort and keeps one wakeful, And the opposite of Virya would be sloth and torpor, dullness and drowsiness. The Buddha spoke a lot about the factor of energy, and um, it comes up in many lists of positive factors. The very closely related quality of Vayama, which is uh, effort, shows up in the Eightfold Noble Path. It's one of the Iddhipadas. It's one of the five faculties. And here we have it in the list of the Bojjhangas. The Buddha said that the goal is attained by the energetic, not by the slothful. So rousing energy, applying energy is absolutely critical for making progress. You won't get anywhere in your meditation with a dull and sleepy, lazy state of mind. You have to have this kind of keen wakefulness, this energetic feeling. I'll give you the definition from the Visuddhimagga, reading from the text of Visuddhimagga. Now, how the commentaries formulate definitions is in a formulaic way, giving characteristic, function, manifestation, and proximate cause. So, for Virya is the state of one who is vigorous, Vira. Its characteristic is marshaling or driving. So it marshaling because it is the factor that summons up all the other positive factors and it energizes them, gives them the power to fulfill their function. Its function is to consolidate co-nascent states. So it's the same idea that it's the energy behind all the other positive states. If you have sati or samadhi or any of the other spiritually positive states, but they're not energized and they can't go anywhere. It's manifested as non-collapse. So the mind is upright and this correlated with the body being upright. Now you can tell someone who's low in energy because they're sitting slumped over. They're sitting in meditation with their head down and their back curved. That's a lack of energy. So it has a physical sign that you can know. Because of the words, be stirred, he strives wisely. Its proximate cause is a sense of urgency. As a sense of urgency is samvega is something that can be roused up, and contemplating death, for example, rouses a sense of urgency. Your time is limited. Contemplating the horrors of samsara, all the kind of dangers of sloth, of falling into a pit of lower states. That should rouse a sense of urgency. You need to get it done. When rightly initiated, it should be regarded as the root of all attainments. Yeah. So this again emphasizes the importance, the central role of energy um, in the practice. Without energy, it goes nowhere. You know? So I think everyone who has a meditation practice will have at some time experienced a lack of energy and knows what that feels like, that sleepiness and dullness in the practice. And it's something that can be difficult to get out of once it begins to set in. But it's critical that one makes the effort. One important aspect to this is the relationship to sleep. One should be careful not to overindulge in sleep. That when you sleep too much, then it just dulls the mind the whole day long. There's an old Chinese saying that he who sleeps more than 6 hours a night never wakes up. I don't think you can put a actual number of hours as an iron rule about sleeping, because it depends so much on the individual and on the circumstances. If you've been working hard all day, then you probably need more sleep. For someone who's on a meditation retreat is spending a lot of time in meditation, they can get by with very little sleep. And it's possible to lie down and rest the body without actually going unconscious. It's also a very good practice when you wake up from sleep to get up immediately, not to drag it out and loll in bed, slowly dragging yourself out of the muck of unconsciousness. But try and make a practice of being alert and on immediately upon waking. That will encourage energy and wakefulness throughout the day. This is true whether you're in a meditation retreat or not. It's certainly on a meditation retreat. Definitely you should do that. But it's helpful even in daily life to make a habit of being quick to rouse in the morning. There's someone asked a question in the chat before we started about doing all night sits. That's something that we did in Thailand from time to time, and it is a very useful practice. Particularly, some people really benefit from it to overcome a lack of energy. There's one of the Dhutanga practices that, called the sitters practice. Dhutangas are ascetic practices that were provided by the Buddha or taught by the Buddha as optional practices one can take on. You make an adhitthana, or like a determination to follow a certain practice for a period of time. One of them is the sitters practice, which means you never, during the time when you're practicing this, you never lie down. So you might go 2 weeks or 3 months or whatever without ever lying down. So obviously you will sleep sitting up, so you don't oversleep that way. You know? But even just to do it for a single night, that's a sitter's practice. You're not going to you're not going to sleep for a night, for a whole night. You're going to meditate through the night, and then you'll be tired. It could be a struggle, but it's a way of dealing with that seductive demon of sleepiness and dullness. Facing it head on and dealing with it. I wouldn't recommend trying to just sit through the whole night. That's be very hard on the body. You'd have to mix it up with walking meditation. But that's something that if you have the opportunity, you may experiment with that and try that. Otherwise, during the ordinary course of practice, you can use different techniques for rousing energy, for energizing the body and mind. First of all, of critical importance is posture. Particularly if you're prone to dullness at whatever particular time we're talking about. If you're falling into dullness, then you should really be attentive to your posture. And mainly that means keeping your back upright, not allowing yourself to slouch. And that's very important. If you have a tendency to nod off in meditation, one of the techniques you can use is to put something on your head, like a small matchbox or something, that size and not very heavy. So if you start to nod off, it'll fall, and you'll hear it. You'll know it right away. That's a way of training. There are also some other little techniques of posture that can be helpful if you're fighting off sleepiness. One is the hands, how you hold your hands. If you hold your hands in this mudra, so the thumbs are lightly touching, you can have that in your lap. You keep the thumbs up and lightly touching. That will be another kind of an aid and a check, because it requires a small amount of muscular effort to maintain that hand posture. And if you start to get too dull and sleepy, the thumbs will fall apart, so you'll notice it right away. There's also a little trick that I come across from Tibetan Buddhism, where they use a lot of kind of yogic techniques, is to curl the tongue inside the mouth so that the tip of the tongue is on the palate of the mouth as far back as possible. And that is supposed to kind of energize some kind of a circuit there in the energetic body, and it does seem to have an effect. Help to energize you. Also, meditating with eyes open. That's we tend to, in our tradition, mostly meditate with eyes shut. There are some traditions that meditate all the time with eyes open. But if you meditate with eyes open, then you have a bit more distraction going on. But if you're dull and sleepy, you shouldn't be worried about that. You need to energize first. That's the most important thing. And if you open the eyes, you're letting light in, then that will in itself just just that much will have a tendency to wake you up. Also, doing more walking meditation. If you're on retreat, you're doing alternate walking, sitting. There's a lot you can do with balancing your practice by adjusting the walks. If you're tending towards dullness, then you increase the time of the walk, and you also increase the pace of the walk. You walk a little bit more swiftly. If you're tending towards restlessness, the opposite problem, then you would shorten your walks and walk more slowly. It's a very useful thing for adjusting fine-tuning the mind. So we could say that kind of leads us into talking about unbalanced energy. Now, energy is always a good factor, but it has, as in the Bojjhangas, we have the balancing of the energetic and the calming factors. We haven't got to talk about the calming factors yet, but if the calming factors are weak and energy is highly developed, it can lead to restlessness and agitation. The energy has to be contained. It has to be in a vessel directed towards the purpose of the meditation, not the scattered energy. You know? And you'll know that restlessness is an obvious problem. Both the body and the mind have a difficulty sitting still. And that's an unbalanced energy. It's not energy that's been harnessed, contained. You know? If the energy is balanced with the calming factors, particularly samadhi, then there's no such thing as too much energy if it's directed into the samadhi. But if there's no samadhi, that is, there's no stillness in the mind is wandering all over, then an energetic mind will be experienced as restlessness and agitation. And then you need to bring up the other factors, the calming factors, which we will get to. There's a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha is speaking to Moggallana before Moggallana's enlightenment. When Moggallana was beginning his practice, he had a lot of struggle with drowsiness. You know, so first of all, that can make you kind of feel better about yourself. You know, even Moggallana was nodding off sometimes to start with. And it's a significant sutta because the Buddha goes through a list of advice to 7 points to Moggallana that were graded. Like, you try this first, and if that doesn't work, then you try this to rouse energy. The first one in the list that I'm reading from Anguttara here. Therefore, Moggallana, you should not attend to or cultivate the object that you were attending to when you became drowsy. By such means, it is possible your drowsiness will be abandoned. So that's an interesting one. You shouldn't attend to the object you were attending to when the drowsiness began. This is something to try and learn by observation in your own practice, to see if you start to drift off, if you start to lose the plot, so to speak. If you can identify the moment that happened. So sometimes, for example, with the wandering mind, it can be a useful practice to try and trace back the trains of thought. Like, okay, you're supposed to be meditating, and now you're thinking about something, way out there. Where did I get off on that? And it can be useful to think, well, that came from here and here and here, and trace it back to when the mind first went off the track. And it's very often, in that case, it's very often a sense impression. You hear a fly buzzing, or you feel an itch, and that gets you thinking about something, and something else, and you're off. In the case of drowsiness, which is what our main concern here today, in the case of drowsiness, uh, it's sometimes, it's not always, but very often, I would say, can be some mental content that's unpleasant that you don't want to look at has arisen in the mind, and the mind retreats into dullness to avoid looking at it. The mind escapes into that into dullness because the being wakeful has felt painful. So if you can identify what you were attending to when the mind slipped into dullness, and make it conscious, and then let it go. Don't attend to it further. Just say, "Oh yeah, that was that," and then go back to your practice. The second point, but if you cannot abandon your drowsiness in such a way, you should ponder, examine, and mentally inspect the Dhamma as you have heard it and learned it. So that's another way of rousing some kind of wakefulness, is to review Dhamma in your mind. Go through something like this: steps of the dependent origination, or this, this list of the 7 Bojjhangas, or whatever. Run through some Dhamma in your mind, attending to the different factors. Obviously, this means that you're not attending to the meditation object per se. You've let go of that samadhi. But this is not important. At the time when the mind is dull, you need to, first of all, rouse energy before you need to worry about being firmly one pointed on the meditation object. You have to, without that energy, the meditation is not going to go anywhere. So you have to rouse that first. The third one, if you cannot abandon your drowsiness in such a way, you should recite in detail the Dhamma you have heard and learned it. So that means recite in detail in this case, because remember that the Dhamma was passed on orally for several generations. So it's basically having memorized passages. So doing chanting out loud, some paritas or some passages that you have memorized can be a helpful way of waking the mind up, because you have to have some wakefulness and attention to be able to do that. And then the fourth, and these are graded in that you're taking more stronger medicine as we go. So the fourth one is, if you cannot abandon your drowsiness in such a way, and then he gives physical remedies. You should pull both ears and rub your limbs with your hands. So pulling your ears is another kind of yogic technique. It's kind of an acupuncture point that you're giving yourself some wakefulness, and rubbing your limbs to get the circulation going, and waking up. So obviously here we're not being concerned with being tightly focused on the meditation object. We're taking ways and means to wake up first. Then number 5, if you cannot abandon your drowsiness in such a way, get up from your seat, rub your eyes with water, survey all the quarters, and look up at the constellations and stars. So you're really waking yourself up. You get up from your seat, you splash water on your face, and gaze around in all directions. So you're getting completely away from one pointed samadhi here. But you need to wake up. And looking at the stars is a way of expanding the mind and wakening up, the consciousness. And the Buddha talks about splashing your face with water. Uh, if where you live is like where I live, and you have winter conditions part of the year, a handful of snow on the back of the neck is really effective for shocking you awake. Or taking a few steps of walking meditation outdoors in the snow barefoot is another really good one. These kind of things will shock the body and mind system enough to really energize it and wake it. Um, then number 6 is attending to the perception of light. Thus, as by day, so by night, as by night, so by day, with a mind that is open and uncovered, you should develop a mind imbued with luminosity. So perception of light, even if there's no light, if you're, it's a dead dark cave you're meditating in, to visualize light, to imagine brightness and radiance, and try and visualize that and let that, it's the opposite. Bright light is the opposite of the dullness, because the dullness is dark and heavy, right? And the bright light clears it all away. So you visualize brilliant light, brilliant clear light, blowing away the cobwebs, so to speak. And the 7th one, is to undertake the exercise of walking back and forth, perceiving what is behind you, what is in front, with your sense faculties drawn in and your mind collected. So doing walking meditation, to do some chankama, walking back and forth and keeping the mind awake and alert, paying attention to your surroundings, but it says also with the sense faculties restrained. So you're not gazing around randomly, taking in the view, but you are trying to be this type of walking meditation to rouse energy. You're trying to be conscious of your surroundings. And so those are the 7 points, but then he goes on to say that if you still can't abandon your drowsiness, then you should lie down on the right side in the lion's posture, and note in your mind the idea of rising, and you'll basically take a nap. Now, this is given for a reason here as a last resort, but sometimes you are just physically exhausted and you need a rest. If one is to take such a a power nap, basically, it really should be quite brief, 20 minutes or so, just to rest the body and mind for a brief period. And the lion's posture is lying on your right side with your head on your hand. And it's more wakeful if you're propped up on the elbow. And if you try and that's one of the postures of meditation. One of the 4 classic meditation postures is lying in the lion's posture on the right side with your head propped up. If you try and do that, you'll find you won't be able to maintain that posture for long. It's actually very hard on the after a while. It gets very hard on the elbow and the wrist. You start to feel really wonky. So it's not a posture you can have a long rest in. But if you want to actually sleep in it, you can just, rest your hand flat uh, on the pillow and uh, sleep like that. So sleeping on the right side is the way the Buddha always slept. It's called the lion's posture. There's um, a sutta that talks about the different postures for sleeping. Sleeping on the left side is the uh, posture of a sensuality realm. Sleeping on the right side is the Buddha's posture. Sleeping on the back is hungry ghost consciousness, and sleeping on the belly is animal consciousness. Whenever there's anything about left and right, it always makes me wonder if it has something to do with the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And if you're sleeping on the right side, or if you're lying on the right side, sleep not lying on the right side, then the left nostril will be open and you'll be breathing mostly through the left nostril. And that energizes the right brain because there's a cross wiring there, and the left side of the body is connected to the right side of the brain. So you're energizing the right brain, the right hemisphere of the brain. So that's kind of speculative. It's always something I uh, always occurs to me when there's any mention of right and left differences. So we got a whole range of things we can do to try and rouse up energy if the mind is dull. And the theme that gets repeated again, with most of these techniques, you're not closely attending to the object of meditation, so you're not worried about your samadhi at that point. And this is very critical in terms of to understand in terms of balancing the faculties. Um, in another list, the five faculties, the indriya, VIriya is specifically paired with samadhi as paired faculties that have to be developed together, and not let one outstrip the other, or your meditation will be unbalanced. Samadhi without VIriya just leads to dullness and sleepiness. And this is the state of mind that the Thai forest tradition calls Bojjhanga. Let's use that word is used. It's a word originally from Abhidhamma, Pali word, but it's used a little differently in the Thai tradition. It's not quite technically what Bojjhanga is understood in Abhidhamma, but it's a state of mind that is like a false samadhi. It's the mind is has no energy, but there's still some kind of attention to the meditation in a kind of feeble way, and it can actually feel sort of okay. It's just kind of relaxed, but it's very dull and dark, and it just ends up, leading into sleep. So you want to avoid that. And if you try and just increase your samadhi at that point, you just get duller and duller. What you need to do is to rouse energy, and that can mean letting go of the intense samadhi, and letting go of the strict attention to the object. So you're doing stuff like some of these steps you give to Moggallana, like going out and looking at the stars. Obviously, you're not attending to your meditation object at that time, but uh, that's what's required. You need to first of all get the energy up so you can meditate properly. And we have also this point from the Visuddhimagga. I'd like to reiterate that the function of energy is to uh, power all the other states, all the other positive states. Uh, it's like electricity in your house. It powers the lights and the computer and the radio and everything else. Is without the electricity, none of those would work. And energy is what's um, fueling or powering, firing up all the other factors. So it's primary. It's absolutely critical that there be a good level of energy. And the only caution is to watch that it doesn't become unbalanced. There's no such thing as too much energy if it's balanced and contained with the calming factors, particularly samadhi. If it's just wild energy shooting around all over the place, then you're going to be restless. You're going to be jumpy. You're going to feel it in the mind and in the body. The mind will be wandering all over the place, and the body will have a difficulty staying still. You'll feel twitchy. That's a sign of restlessness and unbalanced energy. So I'll leave those comments at that point and see what we got to deal with in the chat here. Going back a bit to see if there's a lot of stuff in the chat, see if anything takes the form of a question. In the Dhyana Mudra that you showed, is there any significance or importance to resting the left hand in the right or vice versa? Yeah, I don't think you need to be too fussy about that, but it is the traditional way always to rest the right hand in the left, in any of those kind of postures. Could you please expand on the mudra of the thumbs touching? I started with it as I observed that many images the Buddha has, and with that mudra, immediately I noticed a correlation. Yeah, it is one of the traditional meditation postures. Sitting like I'm raising it up to show you, but the hand should be like resting in the lap, and right hand on the left, and thumbs lightly touching. And yes, the Buddha statues are often done in that way. Hypothetical situation, suppose you lived in a temple where all the other bhikkhus were lazy and didn't practice according to Vinaya. How do you arise Virya in yourself to practice? That's something Ajahn Chah said was you should pay attention to your own practice 90% of the time, and what other people are doing should only concern you about 10%. There's also there's a Vinaya rule that a monk should not look into another monk's bowl to find fault, and that's sometimes that's the actual rule, but it's metaphorically expanded that you shouldn't be looking for faults in others so much. It shouldn't be. I mean, obviously, if you're in a place where everybody's energetic and practicing hard, that's going to encourage you and be helpful to you. But you in the end, you have to find your own inner strength and inner practice. And if you let yourself be too upset or too disturbed by other people's what you perceive as their shortcomings, then you're just hurting your own practice. Is it worth it to spend lots of time to eventually do lotus posture, or is focusing your time on meditation more important? I think if you can do lotus posture, it's really good. If we have, I would caution being careful with it. I've known two people. One was a lay woman, and one was a monk who injured their knees and had to get surgery because they were sitting and forcing themselves to sit in full lotus, and even though it hurt, they just try to tough it out and bear through it. The knees are very delicate and they're easily injured. If you have sharp pains in your knees, you should take that as a warning and back off. Don't overtax the knees. But if you can spend some time stretching and getting better at sitting cross-legged, then it is very stable posture if you can do it without discomfort. But even like half lotus is almost as good. And you can see, if you, again, we're talking about Buddha statues, if you, particularly Thai Buddhas, if you notice, he's always sitting in half lotus. You don't see him sitting full lotus. The reason it's good is because if you can do it comfortably without stress, it's the most stable. Like everything's locked in place. It's an extremely stable posture. But it's not worth it if it's stressful on the body. That's not going to help your meditation. The only thing I would say in terms of posture that's really critical is that the back be upright. The research on what's that word? I have to zoom in here. I can't read that word. I don't know it. Ultradian rhythms, I don't know that word, supports 20-minute naps. Longer ones can lead to more drowsiness. That's interesting. I assume ultradian rhythms are brain waves. I don't know that word. But it's interesting that this says here that there was actually research to back that up. Doubt can powerfully undermine Viriya. Is it simply one more variation of the wandering mind? Yes. Yeah, doubt or uncertainty is an enemy of a peaceful mind. And if you have the opposite, if you have faith, if you have a strong faith, that can actually really feed the energy, because you feel energetic. You don't feel divided within yourself. You're able to be wholly committed. In what sense Viriya is perfection of character? Does it mean that is more a property of intention and not a fruit of vipaka, like being energetic versus getting energetic? Yeah, it's not so much a as you say, a vipaka. It's not so much a resultant as a quality to be developed. But then you'll be energetic. There is a kind of resultant that arises of being energetic, but that comes from deliberately rousing energy. I think it's better to think of it in terms of intentional an intentional act. Although you will experience the fruits of it as by feeling energetic. Do you recommend going to bed immediately after meditating at night? Yeah, that can be meditating immediately before sleep can be a very useful thing. And even then, after you lie down, to continue meditating in the lying posture for a while before sleeping. Could pulling the earlobes, rubbing the limbs be reasonably construed to include yoga, stretching, calisthenics, jogging, other exercise? Oh, yeah, sure. Any kind of physically energetic activity that will rouse mental energy, as long as you don't take it to the point of exhaustion. And a lot of monks do yoga. I do some yoga myself, and used to do a lot more when I was younger. And some of our monks like doing qigong, and any of these kind of practices. They're actually quite harmonious with developing of meditation and Dhamma. Isn't meditation a method of temporarily weeding out more subtle hindrances? Yeah, samatha meditation will temporarily makes them quiescent, but vipassana actually in the end uproots them and permanently eradicates them. Do you recommend drinking coffee or taking pills and drugs to have more energy? I wouldn't recommend taking pills and drugs, but a caffeinated beverage can help overcome sleepiness. It was quite when we did all night sits in Thailand. It was common to have a cup of coffee and either coffee or black tea at around the midpoint of the night, and it's very traditional in Asian Buddhism. Is very tea drinking is which is a caffeinated beverage is very traditional. Is there a relationship between virya and fasting other than initial sluggishness after meals? Yeah, that's something. That's another thing of fasting that some people find find helpful. Occasional fasts uh, to help with energy. Well, certainly, overeating in general is something that's going to dull the mind. Is writing an activity that can difficult samadhi? That's not a proper sentence. I don't know what you mean. Or can it be used as a means to wakefulness? Um, well, it depends. If you if your focus is on developing samadhi, then uh, writing or journaling is not going to be helpful at that time. Uh, it can be it can be a useful practice otherwise. I generally don't, when people are on a meditation retreat, I generally recommend them to put away the journal, not to journal during the retreat. What is the most potent antidote against fear? The most potent antidote, potent antidote against fear is abandoning the attachment to self. The more you can gain an experiential grasp of emptiness and not self, the one of the first things to go with away with that is fear. The fear dissipates directly. Okay. Okay. So I think we'll make we'll make a conclusion now, and next week we're doing the last of the energizing factors, which is a piti or a rapture, which is also a jhana factor. So we'll talk about that next week at this time. Thank you.